Expansion never dies, Joe. Conference realignment never dies.
I thought we were done with this.
We're not. We're not done with this. You know why? Because you had a good idea.
Oh, okay.
And apparently...
I'm like, just don't make me acknowledge Stanford, Cal.
No. We're not talking about
SMU.
that. We're actually not talking about that. Apparently, you had a good idea. And you didn't realize it.
I realized it.
Maybe
No, I knew what I was saying.
Maybe
and
the
I knew
SEC,
who I was saying it too.
Maybe the SEC was listening to the podcast, or maybe you have an inside source with the SEC. Let's go back to earlier in August when we talked to our friend Holden Thorpe, former chancellor at North Carolina, and you hit him with the Butch Davis rule.
They could pull a Butch Davis and get money from the Big Ten. The Big Ten would have to be, so they'd have to become an AAU member. They'd have to go to the Big Ten because in theory, the Big Ten would like to get into the state of Florida, in theory. Then they'd have to get the Big Ten in lieu of broadcast rights, right? They could be a special assistant to Greg Schiano. You're not coaching.
Why do you got to do this to Holden like
You're
that?
not coaching.
Why you got to bring it back up?
Wait, these aren't our media rights. This is a gift. This is an endowment AAU gift from the Big Ten to Florida State, right?
I'm not sure I see the connection, but okay.
No, your guy you had to pay.
No, I know that. Yes.
He was an executive assistant.
Right.
He wasn't, I'm not coaching. I'm an executive assistant to the principal, to the vice regional principal. So
something tells me that's not going to work, but
no, that's not
you
going to
never
work.
know.
And also,
You never know.
So that was our conversation with Holden Thorpe.
Poor Holden, he gives us time, and I'm over here like picking open wounds.
He didn't like that. He didn't like that. So here's Steve Berkowitz, USA Today, earlier in the week, and this is a story as I've pulled up. Texas, Oklahoma were to pay a steep price for leaving the Big 12 early. That's not how it turned out. It's from Steve Berkowitz and Kurt Bowles. So I scroll. I'm like, okay, where's the ESPN portion of this, right? So eventually, ESPN cushions impact for Texas, Oklahoma, and move to the SEC. The part that I found the most interesting, each school's agreement with the SEC states, quote, the institution has represented to the SEC that ESPN or an affiliate of ESPN has agreed to make a transition payment to the SEC over and above all rights fees and other payments otherwise payable to the SEC by ESPN, earmarked and designated for distribution to the institution. The agreements do not say how much money that payment will be, and the schools in the SEC declined to comment about the amount. Meanwhile, Texas and Oklahoma are getting other payments from ESPN under contract modifications that will shut down agreements for so-called third-tier rights to events, including football and men's basketball, but primarily involving sports such as volleyball, women's basketball, softball, baseball, and with Oklahoma, wrestling and gymnastics. Those rights will convey to the SEC and in turn to the ESPN-owned SEC network.
If you were to have learned anything from the previous president, it should be that there's a way around everything.
Of course there is. Of course
legally there's a way around everything.
Mm-hmm.
I'm over here putting 30% of our money into a tax account. Meanwhile, the guy hasn't paid a tax in however long. Why does that work? Right?
Should we try that?
So if these schools want to get around something, guess what they're going to do? When you have enough money, you can get around whatever you want to get around.
Yeah.
That's just the truth of the matter.
Yeah.
And my idea is certainly not a new idea, but just wait till it happens. And it already happened with and I didn't even realize it happened with Texas and Oklahoma.
Mm-hmm.
I saw the Colorado signing bonus.
Yeah, it was like a $2 million signing bonus
to leave. Now that one is, I think, more applicable because that's Colorado leaving an entity that doesn't have an ESPN deal going to the Big 12, which does have the ESPN deal. My theory all along is if the Big 10 is the one that's going to want to add schools from the ACC because they're not involved with ESPN.
Yeah, it
will always be in ESPN's interests because of their contract and the length of the contract they have with the ACC to protect the ACC. The ESPN, so the ACC isn't really the ACC, it's ESPN ACC.
Yeah.
Okay. The SEC actually now isn't really the SEC, it's ESPN SEC. So it owns two important entities. It's not going to destroy one of them for the sake of one that's already the strongest.
Yes.
The Big 10, on the other hand, has no relationship with ESPN. So the Big 10 would be the ones to literally say, here is a signing bonus. Oh, is it for broadcast rights? Oh, no. We've given up our broadcast rights. And ESPN and Florida State would probably still have to forfeit whatever their broadcast rights are.
But there's a way to make that good.
And then there's a way to make that good.
Because TV networks, if they want to,
It's if they're motivated enough. Like what I see them doing, what I see the Big Ten saying, Florida State and Clemson are worth this to our brand. Yes. Do I think they're going to do this for Carolina, Virginia, Duke, Virginia Tech, State, or whoever? No, I do not see that happening.
So 2 quick points. This is why Jake Dickert, who's the Washington State head coach, who in this weird week of let's go after the old pundits, he went after Lee Corso because he had misheard or misquoted Lee Corso saying that the Oregon State-Washington State game was the nobody watches bowl. I think he was trying to say nobody wants this bowl.
Them.
They're the leftovers. They're the Pac-2 at this point.
Yeah.
Dickert had to follow up on this. And he apologized. Like, look, I got a little caught up. And he explains his frustration because there was another portion to that quote that was making the rounds about Lee Corso that I thought was important.
And, my frustrations really still stem from, there's a conglomerate of people that have made a lot of decisions that have been outside, mostly our control. And the lack of clarity based on the metrics and the real facts, is where my frustration really comes from. And I think it is my job to stand up for the people of Washington State, because I think these decisions greatly impact all of us. It impacts our academic institution, our faculty, student body, alumni, the community, Pullman at large. I mean, the grocery store owner down the street. I'm fighting for, my staff and their families, all the men and women in our athletic program. It's really important.
So that's Dickert. And what he was referencing was this conglomerate of people. Who he's talking about and why he's mad is that ESPN is part of that conglomerate of people making these decisions, which gets back to our original point about, so if ESPN wants to make this happen and make Texas and Oklahoma happy and get this thing going with the SEC, then yes, they're going to have some sort of signing bonus or find a way to work around the money to make it all work. Now, I mentioned expansion.
To be clear, I did not come up with the idea. I just recognized that it would happen.
That's game recognizing.
Because you know that I like being right.
You and I both have our things that we like to be right about. Meanwhile, this is from the Posting Courier. I can't bring this up on the screen, but you'll just have to believe me here. And it was titled, Clemson's ACC departure may be, quote unquote, sooner as Gamecocks fret. And they go through a bullet points of, SEC officials and what they might want to be doing in the future and being nimble and everything else. And they get to the crux of this. Meanwhile, at South Carolina, there's a mix of joy and angst. And they highlight Beamer's recruiting edge. And this is from a senior school administrator at South Carolina. Quote, our fan base and coaches do not want Clemson in a league that gives us a great recruiting advantage. We respect what our fans want, and we will play Clemson in all sports anyway. And it gets back to the idea that, well, man, this is what gives us the edge over you. Much like Texas A&M left for the SEC in the first place to finally get some sort of edge on Texas. Of course,
Texas get their own thing.
Texas A&M found out real quick that, oh, wait a minute, you've wanted Texas all along. I see. You took us because you just thought, yeah, why not? You'll set it up in the future. I get where South Carolina's coming from, but last time I checked, South Carolina,
it's not their call.
It's not their call. No. Florida might have more of a say because that was another thing we had with Holden Thorne.
Sure.
Florida does not want Florida State in the SEC, but Florida might actually have more sway in these conversations.
Florida, Alabama, Georgia would be motivated not to have Florida State in the league.
Way more motivated to do that.
Again, still not their call.
No, not their call.